Welcome to Dear Sandy. I'm Sandy Galiff, a member of the New York State Assembly, representing parts of Northern Westchester and parts of Putnam County. And today we're going to be talking about our students, our young people, our young adults, and what is going on in the whole area of mental health and other issues that they are facing. And I have two wonderful guests with me today. First, on my left is Dr. Richard Cannizzaro, and you are the chairman of psychiatry of the Northern Westchester Hospital. Do I have it right?
Yes, you do.
Okay,
Thank you.
good.
Thanks for having me.
And Judy Mezzi, who is the assistant director for community-based programs for student assistance, which, student assistance has been around for a very long time.
Very long
Judy,
time.
I'm trying to remember, like 40 years or so.
Something like that, yeah.
Right?
And we are in many of the high schools and junior high schools throughout Westchester County, and we also work in many of the communities throughout Westchester. We do substance abuse prevention, counseling. We work with communities to look at what their substance abuse issues are and to address them. We have a new mental health counseling component as well. We do bullying prevention, drinking, drugging, and driving prevention, because we find that marijuana impaired driving, prescription drug abuse impaired driving are sort of newer and concerning issues out there. And we do a lot of work with community partners. So we work a lot with the Northern Westchester Hospital and the physicians there around educating people about how these substances impact on mental health and on physical health, things like lung health, vaping and lung health, et cetera.
So you have a nice relationship here.
Yes.
And so you find that people are coming to the hospital or to a doctor's office or whatever with many of these issues that Judy has mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, more and more we're seeing, particularly in the emergency room, young people, older people as well, but young people in particular coming in with the effects or side effects, if you will, of using marijuana, vaping marijuana. They're coming in having full-blown panic attacks. They're coming in completely psychotic, having delusional thinking, seeing things, hearing things, really scared. The irony is that many of these people are kids are using it to help calm their nerves, help with sleep.
It sounds like it's just doing the opposite.
Well, it is in many cases, and you just don't know and you can't predict. I will say that, over the past, even past 20 years, there's been a phenomenal increase in the concentration of the active ingredients, if you will, of marijuana, which is THC. It's tripled in potency. So now the marijuana we're seeing is extremely potent and therefore can be extremely dangerous. This, as I was talking about earlier, this is not the marijuana that was being smoked at Woodstock or,
And I think a lot of people think about it as we're dealing with this issue in Albany about recreational marijuana. I think many people do think it's what it was like in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
And what you're saying is it's not that kind of marijuana.
It's not at all. And, they're engineering it to be more and more potent, and as Judy can tell you and show you, that the devices in which they're creating to deliver these products are more and more efficient at delivering them. And very easy to conceal, so you don't know who or when they're using it, really. It's not as overt as it used to be.
It's interesting because I've heard some of young people that I know that are in high schools and so on, and they say, oh, our friends are, all smoking, and the teachers don't even know that they are,
Right.
and you have to really watch the restrooms and all of this. And, there's such a tug of war with many young people, whether they go with the crowd, part of the peer issue, and or whether they stand up and say, no, this isn't for me. So is that part of the
That is a
education?
huge part of what we do. We run programs in the schools to help amplify the voices of the young people that are making healthy decisions, because we know that in most schools, many of the kids are making really healthy decisions, but their voices aren't as loud and they're not as attractive. The stories aren't as bold and out there as the stories of the kids that are using. So we have to find ways of helping those kids be more persuasive in making healthy choices. We also talk to parents. So one of the things that we talk to parents about is helping to teach your child how to say no from a very early age. So when your child's much younger, it might be saying no to petting a puppy that's on the street, or saying no to going with somebody that you don't know, and
Even if your friend is doing it.
even if your friend is doing it.
Right.
Exactly, how to say no to that friend. For older kids, that conversation changes, but the skills remain the same. So you want to help teach your child how, when they're presented with something like a vape device or marijuana, how can you say no effectively and mean it. And one of the things we tell parents is kids learn from them. So if parents can't say no to their kids are going to have a harder time saying no to their peers. So parents need to also model that themselves, setting
That's
good
got to be a
limits.
hard one in this
That
day
is
and
a
age.
hard one, and it makes me glad that my kids are up and grown.
Mine aren't. But
So you take that to heart
yes,
too,
exactly.
right?
But it is setting an example too, because I think a lot of parents, they're using. And they're using kind of casually, and it gives this kind of tacit approval to, well, it's not a big deal. And perhaps for some people, adults, it might not be a big deal for them if they're using. But for young people with developing brains, and for many people, they just can't handle it. I think much like what you see with alcohol, there are plenty of people who can have a drink and they can be okay. There are many people who cannot. And I see those people as well, and those kids as well, in the emergency rooms, in the hospital beds. It can really wreak havoc. And I think there's this, people make this false comparison, marijuana is safer than alcohol. I don't believe that's so, and I think, unfortunately, we're not going to know for many years, or for at least a few years, if this does become more legal and widespread. I think you're going to see just that small subset of people you see in the emergency room is going to grow. Using marijuana, and you're going to see many more people with panic attacks and psychosis than we do already.
And that's exactly what we're seeing coming out of states that have gone before us in legalization. So we are seeing emergency department admissions go up. We are seeing impaired driving crashes and fatalities skyrocketing in states that have legalized marijuana. So all of the things that Dr. Catanzaro was talking about, we don't need to do the experiment here. We can look at the data that are coming out of the states that have gone before us and see that that's what's
obviously
happening.
Colorado is the first state, so we have more statistics from there, but it's 5 years, and I think what you're saying is it does take a little time to understand what's really happening here.
Sure, and also in terms of brain development, when we're talking about young people,
That's so important.
we just don't know what is exactly happening. We do know that it is messing around with the reward centers of these kids, and it is paving the way for them to be delving into other drugs that are, have more of a euphoric experience for them.
Do we have any? That always comes up. Does it lead? If people use recreational marijuana, does it lead into other heavy drug uses or not? Do we
So
have
is it
the
causal? It's hard to say if it's causal, but it's certainly, there's a lot of correlation because the kids that are using are around kids who are using other things, and there's kind of these branch points. I do think, again, and I think we'll know in the coming years, it does change brain development. It does change the reward pathways, and so I do think you're going to eventually find some good evidence showing that kids are looking for and growing into adults who need other kinds of stimuli to feed those
I've
reward
actually heard,
centers.
I don't know, brain development. I think there's a difference between boys and girls maybe in brain development. I'm not sure, but we're up to maybe 20, 25 or
Yes.
something like that.
Yes,
Boys particularly.
Boys longer.
Yeah.
Right. Boys longer than 26, or is
Oh,
that
I don't
for
know,
everybody?
just longer
No,
than
I
girls.
think longer than girls. I think
Right.
I'm there, but
Right, right. So it just takes a long time, and
Yeah.
you know, everybody's talking about 21 as an
Right.
as an age to have be able to purchase recreational marijuana, but even 21 is at a point where you are really still in development stage.
right, and it's the frontal part of your brain, which is a lot of the decision making and judgment part of your brain. That's what is still developing at that age. So if you're kind of short-circuiting it with use of marijuana and drugs.
I also wanted to add something to what Dr. Catanzaro was saying about the connection between marijuana use and opiate use. And again, we don't have you can't just randomly assign a group of kids to one or another and sort of do that experiment. But I was in a room the other day with a bunch of parents who tragically had lost their children from opiate overdoses. And one thing that was clear from all of their stories is oftentimes the decisions about using other drugs were made under the influence of drugs like alcohol and marijuana. And I was talking to one of the sons who had suffered through addiction but had survived, and he was saying that he used to think that his marijuana use was not at all involved with his opiate addiction. And then a counselor was saying to him, talk to me about every time you made a decision to use a different substance. And he noticed that at every juncture point that he made the decision to take the next step, he was high on marijuana. So that's an anecdote, that's not a study, but I think it is something that we need to pay attention to, that all of these stories emerging have at their root some sort of marijuana use involvement.
It's interesting that states are doing this one by one, but the federal government says it's not legal. Is the federal government, do we know whether they are working on studies of recreational marijuana? I'm just not aware that they are, but
I'm not aware that they are either. I would imagine, certainly there are studies out there for medical
right, the medical purposes, right.
But recreational, I'm not aware. I certainly hope they're somehow doing at least some observational studies, because now you have these whole swaths of people who are being exposed to marijuana recreationally, like in Colorado.
I do think, like the National Institute on Drug Abuse, Nora Volkoff, who's this fabulous physician,
yeah.
I do think her agency, I guess, is funding research into this area. I've heard her speak, for instance, on the addiction potential of marijuana, on how marijuana can sort of unmask or uncover psychosis in youth and young adults. So I do think that there are definitely studies out there. And then there are other countries that are doing studies. So there was a study that came out of New Zealand that talked about kids who use marijuana and the impact on IQ and learning and memory. So there's a huge body of literature.
Right.
It's just important that the public policy sort of follow the public health literature.
right, and that we don't rush into it. We in New York have legalized medical
Right.
marijuana, except we've legalized it in the sense that we say you can do it, but the insurance companies don't seem to cover any of that, so everybody's pretty much on their own, I think. But we've done it looking at each disease. You know, it may have started with, I don't know, certain people having seizures, and then other people's having ALS or Parkinson's, or you know, something else that would help it. And I don't know whether we're following up to see whether what people have been given is really helpful. A lot of it, though, covers not young people, I'd say. It's probably older people, except for the seizures. You know, I met a lot of young children that were going to Colorado, actually, to get help with that. But that's, you know, using it for the purpose of really helping you. So the other question is, if you use recreational marijuana just for the fun of it, is it really helping you?
Well, I'll just want to second what Judy said about Dr. Vokal, who's done a lot of the seminal research, and a lot of these are observational studies, and the one that she cited is that marijuana use, recreational marijuana use, is associated with revealing or ushering in psychotic disorders years earlier than they would have normally appeared. So you're talking like 5-6 years earlier, people having psychotic breaks. They are predisposed to have psychotic breaks, but now you're talking about 6 more years of your life where you're going to be suffering from this very severe illness that could have been postponed or perhaps, you know, pushed off indefinitely.
And one wonders if it can do that, what else can it do to the brain? So that's something to really be concerned about. I think that a lot of our medicines are derived from plants, right? So very few people know, like aspirin, I believe, is derived from the bark of the willow tree. We don't call it...
I love a willow tree.
We don't call... I love a willow tree, too. We don't call it medicinal willow. We call it aspirin. And it does appear that certain, like Dr. Catanzaro was saying, that the active ingredient in marijuana responsible for the high is THC. There are other cannabinoids, like CBD, that have been found really to be quite helpful, perhaps. I haven't actually seen the research on it in things like childhood seizures. We just need to be really careful and go slow and take a look at it. You know, before the opioid epidemic exploded the way it has, there was a very small study, my understanding is, that came out that said that people that got prescription opiates for pain would not become addicted to it. Well, that clearly is not true.
Not true.
So we have to make sure that we don't jump the gun again, that we really look at the data as they emerge and are thoughtful in how we then structure public policy around that.
So do you think in structuring and in getting public policy, are we really investigating all these things from your perspective? I mean, I'm a legislator, so I guess I have to vote on all these things. But with the public, because I've had a forum, I've had a town forum on the pros and cons of having recreational marijuana, and you know, and I have a divided constituency. Does everybody, you know, have in-depth information? Do you find that as you're going around?
I don't think so.
No, it's kind of like just a feeling that it's okay because we have alcohol and they're doing it anyway?
Yeah, and also I hear a lot of people, I like that you mentioned the willow tree, because there are a lot of people that come to me and say, well, I wanted something natural. I wanted something natural to treat my ex. And I get that. However, as I just talked about earlier, a lot of the marijuana you're seeing is very unnatural. It's very genetically modified to be, it's like the difference between an aspirin and rocket fuel. I mean, this is not a benign substance, not necessarily a benign substance. So, yeah, I think people they're not educated, and there isn't the kind of research that we would like, the kind of clean research we would like to kind of say, well, if you use this should happen. There are components like CBD that are used, and they're even doing studies in treating
Right.
PTSD and using it even in psychosis.
But my understanding is CBD doesn't get you high, so that's
Correct.
And I would say that that's why having forums like this and the forum that you hosted and having this television show is so incredibly important, because even some of the basic facts that we're discussing here that I know so well because I do this for a living and I talk about it all the time, but the fact that the potency is so much greater now, that kids can be vaping these THC concentrates, that the local hospital is seeing kids coming in with panic attacks and psychotic symptoms subsequent to having used THC. These are things I think that the general public doesn't know, and why it's so incredibly valuable to have
know
something
until
like
you're in it,
you don't know
probably.
until you're in it, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're in it, it might be too late. And so that's why this is an awesome opportunity. So we,
Let's talk about the vaping.
yeah.
Because, as I mentioned before, it seems to be going on everywhere. There are all these issues and flavors and all
Right.
of this that is taking place. I know, Judy, you brought.
Right,
I've not ever done this, so I'm foreign to. I have to admit, I used to be a smoker up until I was like 22, and I stopped. And I
Good for
just
you.
never, and I tell people the best thing to do is never start, because it's too hard to stop.
That's
so
right.
it's just better not to. But so that's why I would never participate. I've done that. And
Right.
yeah, the
Right.
problems that can come
And
with
you're,
it.
and
so.
you got lucky, because there are a lot of
Yes.
people that started that really struggle with
right.
quitting.
And
So
I have
very,
friends that can't stop.
we're very
Right.
fortunate.
Right.
So this is the Juul, Juul, which is sort of the ubiquitous vaping device in Westchester. This is the actual device.
Is it just in Westchester?
No,
it's
I'm
all
sorry,
over.
it's all over. You're absolutely right. I thank you for that correction. It is all over.
Right.
And it has these little pods that are flavored, and each pod has the nicotine equivalent of a pack of cigarettes in it.
In that small-
one little pod.
Right,
And I
right.
should say right now that most of what I know about all of this I've learned from Dr. Catanzaro's colleague, Dr. Stumacher, who I believe was also on
Yes,
this show
yes, right.
at Northern Westchester, and he does a fabulous job explaining this. So these are very discreet. You can see it looks like a thumb drive. It charges just by popping into this and being put into your computer or your PlayStation.
PlayStation, if you'd like.
So a parent might not even notice that this is a vape device. Doesn't require a cigarette. It doesn't require a cigarette lighter or a match. That's what makes it different than cigarettes. So it has a battery right in it, and so it doesn't get hot to the touch. So if I was walking down the street and I saw my assemblywoman walking towards me and I didn't want
And
her
you
to
didn't
know
want her
that
to
I
know,
was
right.
vaping, I could
Right.
very discreetly tuck this just about anywhere, and you would have no idea. And that's what's happening, I think, in schools. It's become a real
And there
issue.
really isn't smoke from that, is there? Or
No,
is there
there's
just-
there's
it's
a
vapor, but-
vapor that might come out of it, although kids can swallow that vapor, and so it's not really, you might not notice it at all, or kids could, just sort of breathe it out into their hoodie or whatever it is that they're wearing. And in addition, the little pods can be hacked so that you can drain out the nicotine oil and put in these THC concentrates that are called wax or
Oh,
dab or
Right.
oils.
So nobody would know.
Nobody
that you're
would know.
smoking marijuana.
Right. And if you're thinking about
Vaping marijuana.
back in the day, the THC, which is what we've been talking about, is the ingredient that's responsible for the high, might have been something like 3%
Right.
THC. These days, you can buy concentrates, the marijuana concentrates, that are upwards of 85-90% THC. So if you think about that as a parent, imagine your child comes home with a 3% on their midterm or a 90% on the midterm. That's like a different stratosphere. So it's really important that parents understand that it's a different drug, it has different consequences for their kids, and it can be used in different ways. So I think that's really, really important for parents to know.
Right. And also for parents to know, I know we have a quick video.
Yes.
And there's one about the driving under the influence, I guess,
Yeah.
of Juul, or under the influence vaping or marijuana.
Really,
Right.
although vaping can lead to distracted driving, which is something that we're very concerned about. So if you're fiddling around with anything when you're driving, you know, if you're fiddling around with the sandwich or your hair or your makeup or your vape or your phone, those are all problematic. But marijuana, by its very nature, the high that it produces interrupts many of the skills that we need for safe driving.
Okay, let's listen
Great.
to the public
Let's.
service announcement.
Thank
We'll get
you.
that up there.
Don't drink and drive talk also include don't use marijuana and drive. You taught them excellent driving skills, but what about marijuana use and driving? Drinking and driving don't mix, but using marijuana and driving is also a combination for disaster. It impacts driver alertness, concentration, coordination, and reaction time. Marijuana is the most common illegal drug found in drivers killed in crashes. Westchester parents need to set clear non-drug use expectations. Get the facts at powertotheparent.org.
Wow, parents have so much to think about, don't
So
they?
much to think about.
It really is, and both of you give guidance to parents, right?
We try to, yes. I certainly, you know, when patients, kids come into the emergency room, we sit with the patient, the child, but we also will be doing some education with the parents, talking to them about all these things that we mentioned tonight.
And your colleagues are all over the place talking about these issues with parents and with students. So Dr. Stumacher, I think, is in a different school district every week talking to parents and kids about vaping, and he talks about the THC issues. And what's so amazing about what he does is he's a pulmonologist. So I work for a substance abuse prevention agency. I'm suspect in what I say, right? My agency tells me, go out and talk about that these things are dangerous. But he's a pulmonologist. He has no skin in this game, right? He just cares about lung health, and he talks to parents and teens about how dangerous this is. So it's really helpful what Northern Westchester is doing.
It's about the lung health. It's about the
Brain
psychiatry,
health.
the brain health. It's about the health of our generation today and in the
Exactly.
future.
Right.
Because if we go in this direction, I don't know where we're going to go with the residents of our state and other states as we go forward.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
just your parting words
Well,
to the audience.
I would say you have, if you're going in this direction, do it with eyes wide open. And I don't think we can say that we're doing it with eyes wide open quite yet, because we don't have the research behind what the effects on the brain will be and on public health. So,
Right. So go slowly on recreational marijuana adoption.
yeah.
Yes.
I think I would
Same
say
thing?
protect the brains of our, you know, I would
Yeah.
really like to punctuate the brain health, that this is really about youth brain health, and we owe it to them to help them protect their brains.
Right. I thank you both for
Thanks
being
for-
on the
thanks for having
program
us.
and
Thanks for having us.
imparting a lot of wonderful, valid information that we all have to think about as we go forward on this issue and with the families that we care about. So I wanna
Thanks so
thank-
much for your leadership.
Yes,
Thank
I
you.
thank you so much, and thank you for watching. If you have any questions, give us a call. Give me a call at 914-941-1111. Thanks so very much for watching. Have a good evening. Thanks.